Global Socialpreneurs is brought to you in part by Positive Talk Radio, KKNW 1150 AM in Seattle. Check them out at www.positivetalkradio.net.
Welcome to Global Socialpreneurs, a one-of-a-kind talk show showcasing expert social entrepreneurs. Learn their stories and their secrets to creating a sustainable impact. Now, here is your host, social entrepreneur Anne Scotland.
Hi, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our show, Global Socialpreneurs, where we are trying to change the global conversation about social entrepreneurship, about what it is, what it means, how we can make it sustainable, and how we can impact the world around us. So thank you for tuning in. Whether you're already a social entrepreneur or whether you're thinking of becoming one or know someone who is one, this is a great place to hear from experts from all over the world. Talk with me as I interview them about their work and understanding in the world of social entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining us, and let's just dive right in. Today we have a guest I've really been looking forward to having, and from the UK, my friend Adrian. This is Adrian Ashton, and he's described by many as a leading example as a social entrepreneur. Although he says he's never seen himself as one himself. Could I revisit my English here before we get rolling again? So he says he's never seen himself as a social entrepreneur because of how he models and manages his business and the way it impacts. So we'll be super excited to unpack that, learn more about his definitions and around the expanding possibilities of what social entrepreneurship means. Adrian is always striving to try and help improve conditions for everyone, recognizing that in doing so, he is in some small way contributing to the world to become a better place for his kids to grow up and start their own adventures. So please help me welcome the one, the only, Adrian Ashton. Hi, Adrian.
Ah, I made it all the way from the UK.
All the way.
Through passport control, the plane wasn't delayed. We did it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we are so glad you did. So glad you made it here. And so I am just so excited to have this conversation with you today. And I know that we're going to talk about a lot of things. One of the things that we both talked about was that we're going to talk about in a few minutes on is what succession means around the topics of humanitarian efforts and around especially social entrepreneurship. What does that mean? How do you know when enough is enough? And or how do you know how you can create a sustainable impact with your program so that it can continue on? So super excited to unpack all that. But first of all, just tell us a little bit more about the one, the only Adrian Ashton, and what is it you do, and what has brought you to the place with the work you're doing now?
So, how long have we got, Anne? I always kind of say it depends who you ask.
No, I'm just kidding.
I never claim to have had a grand ambition in this life about what I wanted to achieve, or I was never one of those kids at school who said, I'm going to be a train driver, or I'm going to be an astronaut. I was always kind of jealous of them because I just thought, well, I'm just curious. I just want to see what's around the next corner. My parents brought me up as well to say, if someone asks you nicely, try and say yes. So this whole movement recently about saying no more to protect yourself is really hard for me because my parents are in my head stopping that. So I went through school, did the whole school thing, did college, studied courses which, well, frankly, weren't necessarily the courses I chose, but were the only courses that I could get onto. Popped out the other side, no real intention of where I wanted to get to. So I thought, well, let's just try stuff out. So I signed as a temp. So I went through these agencies and I said, well, that place needs a receptionist for a week. This place needs an archive clerk for 2 weeks. Tried all these businesses, which incidentally, if you're starting out in this life in terms of careers and jobs, and you want to understand how organizations and workplace cultures work, be a temp. Because I discovered very quickly that if you say, I'm just a temp, you can do no wrong. Whatever you screw up, it won't stick on you. People will forgive you. And more importantly, everyone will reveal all the company secrets to you because you're immune is politics. You get to find out who slept with who, who's done the dodgy deal with that supplier. So you get this huge insight, which was great. Anywho, I'm getting distracted. So tempted lots of different industries, ended up landing in a worker cooperative, which are huge in America, not quite as big and well established here in the UK, ironically. And that retaught me everything I thought I understood about business over the course of a few years. And then from there was successively approached by charities, other cooperative businesses, social enterprise bodies to take on project management roles, lead the agencies. And then about 18 years ago, had what seemed to be the dream career offer. You know, out of the blue, this big social business came to me and said, "We've heard about you." So again, a generational thing, showing my age. To put this into context, 18 years ago, the iPhone did not exist. X, or Twitter as we used to call it, was a teletext service. Okay, it wasn't on your app on the phones. Dropbox didn't exist in terms of LinkedIn. No, not there either. And yet this firm at the other end of the UK had heard of me and said, "We want you. We're going to create this job." So I kind of packed up, moved, took my family up north to the other end of the country. And then they said, "We're very sorry. No job after all. Good luck with everything. Bye." So I had that moment of, you know, I've been creating change. I've been leading stuff. People have enjoyed it. They've said it's good. And now suddenly I'm adrift. Yeah, where do I go next? So did what I've done since I was 14, knocked on doors, said, "Hi, I'm Adrian. I've delivered papers. I've, you know, kind of butchered cuts of beef before in abattoirs. I've worked on radio shows. What do you need? I'll do anything because I've got a family to support." And very fortunately, had some breaks working with some social enterprise programs, got noticed, other people started talking about me, and successively my name's been passed around, which kind of led us in part to this conversation today. But over that period, I've worked with sort of departments in UK government. I've worked with national sector bodies. I've accidentally changed bits of company law here in the UK to make it more favorable and supportive for social entrepreneurs. I've done research that's influenced national policy. I've accidentally written a book about imposter syndrome that feedback I get from people who've read it says, "This has changed the way I've thought about this. I'm not trying to get rid of it. Now I realize it's a superpower." And there are people now taking their research, their work further than they would before. And I'm just still bouncing along going, well, this seems interesting. And again, that voice of my parents in my head, Mark and Barbara, if you're listening, yep. Because you brought me up, have good manners, try and say yes, try and be helpful. Obviously, the universe is putting all the right people in front of me to say, "Would you try this?" And, you know, and when you approached me and said, "Would I come on the show?" Again, my parents are in my head, so thank them. And hopefully there's some serendipity through the show today that other people hear or listen and go, "That's great. That's given me what I need to know. That's encouraged me, challenged me." And that's helping to keep the big wheel turning.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. So I love what you were talking about as far as collectives. And just for people who may or may not be super familiar with what that means, can you just break that down just a little more to explain what that means and whether that's public or private, for-profit, non-profit? Yeah.
So a worker cooperative from the outside looks like any other regular business, except it doesn't have a Jeff Bezos at the background owning all the shares and pulling all the strings, or an Elon Musk. Instead, all the people who work in the business own it collectively between themselves. It's their business. They have a stake in it. They're working it. They're running it to sustain their employment for themselves. They're designing it so that it's the best designed jobs for their welfare and well-being. And because of that kind of passion and ethos, they're also then saying, how do we be the best supplier we can be? How do we be the best buyer we can be? How do we be the best neighbor we can be to our community? So we see worker cooperatives actually being, the research shows us, the most resilient form of business models out there as we go along, and the most impactful for the jobs they're creating and the impact they make on local communities. And they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colors. But like I say, in America, they're much better established than here in the UK.
This is great. And that's such a great answer. Thank you. And it's such a great summary of what that means. And the reason I really wanted you to elaborate on that was just because this is a really interesting piece of what can be part of social entrepreneurship. And we could talk all day about whether those individuals are social entrepreneurs or part of a social entrepreneur enterprise, if it is a social business enterprise.
Mhm.
But tell me, what got you excited in the first place around the concepts of social entrepreneurship?
Again, it goes back to my parents. It's that sense of, they brought me up with a sense of social justice, and apparently, even before I can remember, they were taking me on protest marches against nuclear arms, getting into trouble with the police. So there's a story of a rally they took me on, and then as the rally was finishing, the police pulled them to one side and sort of, please, well, I'm not sure if I'm pleased to say, but I occasionally still find the hand of the law on my shoulder from time to time, saying, what's going on here? And fortunately, always able to resolve it amicably. There's no charges ever brought, so we're all fine still. So there's something about, sort of looking at the world and saying something's not quite right. This isn't fair. This is not right. We're a social species, human beings to human beings. None of us exist in a vacuum. We stand or fall together as a community. So, that sense of social entrepreneurship that says we've looked out of the window, something's not quite right. And rather than relying on a traditional philanthropic model of charity, relying on the goodwill of strangers to give us a gift that may or may not happen and may or may not come with strings, what if we set up something more sustainable, something rooted in trade and commerce, which gives us more control, more empowerment as well? So again, this sense of, if we're talking about trying to empower people, give them a sense of progression and hope for the future, we can set up a traditional charity, no problem with that. But then the people who are supported through that charity will always know on some level they've been supported because of the kindness of strangers who've, to some extent, taken pity. A social entrepreneur says, actually, I want something that goes further than that. I want everything. I want the cake and eat it. So I want to create jobs that will actually give people a sense of worth. So people know that when I'm employing them, that, be they're an ex-offender, somebody who's recovering from mental ill health, whatever it is, I'm doing this job and it's worthwhile. And it's actually a job that I've never had before. No one else would give me this chance. And I've earned this. And through my efforts, I'm sustaining it. That kind of impact for the individual, we're not changing the world in terms of the global ball we're all spinning around on. We're changing that person's world, how they see themselves and who they are as a human being. That there's the kind of the cliche, if we change the world for one person, we've changed the world. Actually, it's that power of collective actions. If we're all doing our part, that's how you start a movement. A single drip does nothing, but you put enough drips together, you've got a flood, you've got a tsunami, you've got an ocean of change coming around.
So would you say that for you, what the difference between social entrepreneurship and traditional nonprofits is more the effect, let's say particularly the emotional and psychological effect it has on the quote unquote recipient of the service? Would you say that that's part of what makes it different? Is how the person receiving the help feels about themselves, or did you are actually articulating that differently?
I think that can be part of it sometimes. For me, so again, when you're kind of doing the introduction, I always find interesting this idea of lots of social enterprise movements in the UK go, oh, look at Adrian, isn't he a great social entrepreneur? And I keep saying, no, I'm not. Because from the outside, what you see publicly can be indistinguishable. So here in the UK, McDonald's is actually one of the most impactful businesses we have in the UK for creating social good, environmental benefit, employment, welfare, supporting families, and so it goes. They don't trade on that, but they're not afraid of it. But at the same time, this is the same company that came under a lot of boycott, not that long, within the last few years. But they've changed. They've introduced business practices that are actually creating impact and benefit for employees and others. The difficulty is, for me, that's not embedded. A new chief exec could come in and that could all change. Market forces could flip and they go, we need to start saving money, so we're going to drop that. A social entrepreneur says, because my motivation is rooted in creating change over time and embedding that into my business, that's the difference. Traditional entrepreneur, there's a market opportunity to trade, to make money, and that money might do some good things, but ultimately I'm in charge of it and I'm going to benefit. Social entrepreneur says there's a market opportunity to trade, to generate money, and with that money, we will create good things, and we will always be creating those good things. I may take a wage, but ultimately this thing's going to outlast me, and it's creating something bigger than me. And my reward will be in the next life from this. I'm not going to take the big payout in the way that a traditional startup would.
But you can make a decent living. And I think that's part of what we're, what this conversation that I've been trying to, increase and expand on a global level is that social entrepreneurship means you can still make a living, you can still live a decent lifestyle, but it's the principles that the business are set up on that is different. So, absolutely. And I would say from all the social entrepreneurs I've interviewed, there doesn't seem to be a exact percentage of how a percentage of profits given back. Some people are more structured, some people are less structured. But what is that for you, or do you have in your mind? And part of what we talk about here is people's differing versions of how they see social entrepreneurship. For you, is it more the outcome of the service provided by the business? Or is it the percentage of money that's contributed toward a particular cause in the end? Or is it all of the above?
All of the above. There you go. That's the easy answer, isn't it? To move along. I think the difficulty is social enterprises can come in lots of different flavors and shapes and colors and smells. So, for example, there was a brilliant paper by the Charities Aid Foundation called The 3 Models of Social Enterprise, which says you're either what your service is doing is intrinsically good, like a wind turbine. So the more wind turbines you build, the more energy, renewable energy you create, the less carbon you're producing, the better. It's that model. Or you have where most social enterprises or social entrepreneurs build their business model is the trade-off model that says we will purposely limit our profitability as a business because we're employing people who have more support needs, because we're using suppliers who are more expensive, but we're investing that in terms of the fair trade premiums, models like that. Or I think this is where the interesting space is, the unrelated model. So here in the UK, we have a social enterprise called Bellew Water, which I always find a fascinating case study because they win awards for being a fantastic social enterprise. But their product is bottled water. And bottled water is environmentally one of the most evil products on the planet. But they've worked out there is a market. People will want to buy it. Even we know the ethics, or we've done blind test trials. Tap water is actually better for us. It tastes better, but it's bottled water's got this thing. So they said actually, well, what we'll do is we could kind of try and stop people drinking bottled water, but actually no. Our vision, our purpose, our motivation is about water sanitation globally. And there is a product in the marketplace that relating to water that people want to buy and want to pay a premium for. So we will be in that marketplace. We will position ourselves as a high brand product, charging a premium price, and all the money we make from that, and we're going to try and make as much as we can, frankly, we will take and we will put in to these social programs around the world in terms of water sanitation. So they've kind of, that's their trade, that's their idea, unrelated business model. We've found a product or service, it makes a ton of money. Other private businesses are in the space doing it. Why don't we get a piece of that action and we claim it for good? Actually, and because we're inside that space now, we're inside the tent, we can start to lobby a bit as well. We can start to challenge those other private businesses' expectations and ideas about, well, how can you give all your profits away and still be successful? So again, this idea of we model behavior. As we grow up as children, we learn rules because of what we see in the playground, what our teachers tell us, what we see other people doing. If as a business we can start to model behaviors that challenge other businesses, we can amplify that change and it goes through. So the worker cooperative I was part of, when I go through, is a whole food worker cooperative called Daily Bread in a city called Cambridge. And when I was with them, one of our big things that we always tried to do was be part of corporate networking events through the chambers of commerce, business clubs. And the reason we would do that would be we turn up there and we try and challenge these other private businesses to say, look, you can employ people who everyone else has written off. You can have a supply chain, which you're paying a premium for. And you can do all of that and still be a sustainable business and a growing business and not need to do it with grants or subsidy or tax reliefs from the council and the government to challenge their thinking. Because our idea was, if we're just trying to do this by ourselves, that's nice for us, but ultimately that change only goes so far. We're trying to spread that vision, that, you know, that this idea of succession. How do we spread this change beyond ourselves? So as a business, we deliberately went out to influence the bad business community, but we can only do that by engaging with them on their terms, in their places, but that they hang out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to just back up for one moment to talk a little bit about profits, because I assume most people who are watching are probably have some business experiences, but not all. And my point is that social entrepreneurship should be available to everyone, and that we all have combined experience that can make us an effective social entrepreneur. So when you talk about the bottled water company, and they're going to give all of their profits to XYZ for clean water. The point being, that's after the employees have been paid. This is actual profits. This is after the founders have been paid whatever they are designated, probably limited by a board of directors or whatever they have decided in advance. This is the limit to the pay. So everyone gets paid. Once the business is profitable, then it's those profits that are used or reinvested. But ultimately, that's the difference. And I think that's where people really misunderstand social entrepreneurship. Especially some of my friends in Europe who are not social entrepreneurs by trade, or this is something just very peripheral in their mind, even more than Americans. There seems to be this little like, ooh, you're getting your hands dirty. You're doing humanitarian or environmental work, but you're getting paid. Like, isn't that a little sleazy? You know, kind of like, what? And I was like, well, no, first of all, it's a little less weird to Americans. We have this very, for better or for worse, you know, this very entrepreneurial, self-employed, driven mindset of money making. And so being an abstract and doing business differently is not unusual. But I'm saying, no, you know, it's the good that has been done and continues to be done by nonprofit organizations is incredible, but it's not accessible by all. And for many people now, the water bottling company is kind of a macro example of social entrepreneurship, or eventually maybe even this becoming a social enterprise. So it can sort of evolve even from one to another, as being kind of one of those big, you know, we want to shoot for the moon businesses. But a lot of social entrepreneurship is very grassroots. It's very, it's begun by people on the ground to fulfill a need on the ground where they are. And that's something that is often different from traditional large scale models traditional large scale models of the big organizations, the big nonprofits, which is kind of going in with a macro view, saying we're going to solve this problem in this country, or et cetera. And there's research done in all this. And there's a lot of times there's money, enormous amounts of money put into it, and only very small percentages, as we've seen from the numbers, actually takes effect on the ground. They spend most of their income fundraising for more income. Like, it's just this very interesting phenomena, as opposed to someone who says, in my community, there is no after school, there is no preschool program for working single moms who cannot afford expensive preschool. How can I make a living, create local jobs, and especially to help single moms with their kids so that they can have a job? And maybe we can even expand this so that there's after hours training so that they can earn certificates so they can get better jobs. Can we make this a comprehensive opportunity for everyone to be win-win-win? So that's where the kind of grassroots version of social entrepreneurship comes out and says, we're going to change things on the ground because there's a need now. And I can't even tell you how many people, even people I've had on this show, who had no idea they were social entrepreneurs. And it's not the name, it's the idea of what are you actually doing? But they've been doing this work sometimes for weeks, months, even years, and didn't even know there was a name for it. I just interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, until I met you, I had no idea that I was a social entrepreneur, because they'd identified a problem, they were solving it, it was for profit, they were getting paid, and they were making a tremendous impact on the ground, but it's structured differently.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing.
Yeah. And I think there's something there as well about, well, there's a few things in there, really. So one is about the badge. You know, can you do this without calling yourself that? Well, people do this all the time without realizing that they could claim a badge for it. You know, and I've got a badge now. So and always say to people, you know, are you happy with that identity? You know, and always say, you know, we mentioned before I came on the show, I'm actually a legally titled lord, and my wife is a legal lady. So I'm Lord Adrian Ashton. My wife is Lady Zoe Ashton. We don't kind of use it unless we're trying to.
You have no idea how jealous us Americans are of your titles.
I know. Well, maybe that's the kind of, you know, if we have a kind of a subsequent kind of recall in terms of if people like the show, I'll come back and I'll tell the story about how that came. It was another accidental thing as it happened. Anyway, I was going somewhere with that. So yeah, names, badges. So there's this sense of people going, you know, well, is that I'm okay with this identity? You know, you're telling me I'm a social entrepreneur. You don't have to accept that as your identity. It doesn't stop you doing good stuff. I always said, if it helps you open new doors, if it helps you engage the people you need to engage to get it out, brilliant. But otherwise, just leave it in the box.
Yeah.
You know, and wheel it out with you. Like, I've won some awards. They tend to sit in the cupboard behind the sofa, unless my parents come around, and then they're out on the mantelpiece, dusted down. And so yes, that sense of use it when it's useful, but it's your vision, your passion, your motivation, that impact you're creating. It should be influenced by your values and in a way that you're comfortable with. So do it by your rules, not other people's rules. So there's the kind of that part I think is important to pull out. The other one you mentioned, this idea of, yeah, you know, seeing a need and just setting up and doing it. Aside in terms of like the preschool thing, just a few weeks ago, I was working with actually a preschool nursery here in the UK. So Fair Hills Nursery, if you're watching, if you're ever in Greater Manchester, go and see Fair Hills. And really, I mean, they've been around for decades, and the stuff that they're doing in that community in Salford is just fantastic. And they're constantly evolving it, they're constantly growing it, they're reaching new families, new communities, supporting children and then supporting families and parents, not only freeing up their time, but actually helping them engage with those employment and retraining opportunities off the back. But there's something about saying, I look out of the window, I'm in that position. How do I start it? You know, I've got that motivation, that passion, but, you know, I'm not sure I've got the skills or the confidence to do it. So here in the UK, you know, over the years, we've had this thing called social franchising. So, you know, a bit like kind of Starbucks or McDonald's or Burger King. So like a franchise, a replicated business. But instead of those sorts of models of franchise that says, you know, all the money goes back and you get very little control, these are more open-ended. These are more about, again, that's this idea of succession, spreading the model, spreading the impact, allowing other people and communities to pick something up ready-made that they can then introduce, adapt it to suit their needs, and it scales. So one example of that here in the UK is something called the Incredible Edible movement. So I used to live in a town called Todmorden, famous for many things, including, to my knowledge, still the only town in the world to have 2 Nobel Prize winners. But it's also home to this thing called the Incredible Edible movement, Incredible Edible Todmorden. And if you look it up online, Google it now or Bing search, whichever you want to do, you'll think, oh, this is about growing food in your gardens for everyone to eat. So any bit of scrap land that you find in your town or your neighborhood or on your college campus or at a railway station, you just plant vegetable crops or fruit crops, tend them as you're all going around your business. And then anyone who needs food, it's there to access, it's there to have. That's kind of it, you know, so this impact, this change. And they've said, you know, as part of the Incredible Edible network, all this stuff is open source. Just take the model and run with it. The only thing we ask is, if you want to do it, let us know. Tell us how you've tweaked it, what's working for you, and we can all then share in that, amplify this movement together. So it's a form of replication as a way to continue that model and that impact going forward. Now, the other thing about but this is where it gets really interesting. There's a dark secret at the heart of Incredible Edible. It's not actually about the food. Food is the cover story. Actually, the motivation behind Incredible Edible was about getting to know your neighbors. Here in the UK, you know, Americans, you're beautiful, you're lovely, you'll embrace anyone, you'll have a conversation with anything. Off you go. It's great. Here in the UK, we don't really do that. We don't do small talk. You can live years on the street and never actually, if you time it carefully, you'll never even see your neighbors coming in and out of their doors. And that's like, you know, life goals for many people. But that doesn't make resilience. That doesn't build for, supported lives. It stops, serendipity happening. So Incredible Edward said, how do we find a way to allow neighborhoods, people and communities to talk to each other, to break down those barriers, to build meaningful friendships that can support each other through times of need or trouble? Because again, Todmorden is also one of the most flooded towns in the UK. That's a whole other issue and podcast story perhaps. So I said, well, what's the one thing everyone has in common? Well, other than the fact that everyone has to wipe their bottom, everyone has to eat food. So what if we use food as the way and how can we get food doing so? Well, if we make it public and we say to people, grow it in your gardens, and then if you want to take your neighbor's food, you knock on the door. Is that okay? We're very polite in Britain. Is it okay if I take your courgettes or your marrows or your apples? If you're kids, you just nick it. But if you get older, we have this idea. So all of a sudden, you've started this conversation. And then it becomes, well, if you're taking my marrow, that's fine. Do you know how to cook it? Can I share some recipes with you? And then you started a conversation. You're getting to know people. You're building that sense of community together.
So this is basically an example of an understated co-op, again, kind of where we started this conversation.
So the collective action, collective mutual support. Yeah.
This is a mutual support, collective action. Now, whether or not this one was actually for profit, I guess that's another really excellent point, and probably for another day. How do you define profit? It's not always in dollars and cents. I think that is important. Hey, that doesn't do me any good over here.
It's got the king and queen's head on it. I thought Americans loved our monarchy,
I know we do. I have all kind of box of your coins. I love them. I'm like, they're so cool. We're so enamored.
Well, actually, in which case, I'm probably got. So my father, who has just finished being the mayor of the city of Cambridge, So we've just recently, you may sadly we lost Elizabeth II a little over a year ago now, succeeded by her son, King Charles. King Charles, after his coronation, the first person to shake his hand on an official thing was my father as the mayor of Cambridge. So this hand is kind of 2 handshakes away from the King of England. So
I love that. I love that.
I have to be very careful when I wash it.
Yeah, we're more like selfies with the Hollywood people, that's when I was acting full time in Los Angeles. That was the big thing. It was like, how many selfies with famous people could you get on your Instagram feed? But no, it's fascinating though, like this co-op, this collective principle around. So again, and then productivity and what is profit? Again, I think so much more for another day because we're like having so much fun but I'm really enjoying what we're just talking about because I like to get back down to the brass tacks and the principles of social entrepreneurship because they are in many ways mistaught, misunderstood. I think defining profit, I'm literally going to write this down right now because this is going to become a new question in the show.
Well, actually, this point of profit here in the UK, and this is an interesting, again, it's really sort of edifying for me to have these sorts of conversations with you, Anne. Because there's huge cultural differences between the way that we approach this, depending where we are in the world, because of our respective histories and laws and things. So here in the UK, social entrepreneurship and the wider social enterprises are often bound up with this term, not for profit.
Interesting.
So
yes, that's what's so confusing.
Yeah, so it's defining itself by what it isn't. So saying, well, private businesses are for profit. We are not traditional private businesses. So how do we say it's not for profit? That's a big. Now for me, and I was going to say, if you ever see me in person at an event and the fight's broken out and you see I've started to slap someone, it's because they've introduced themselves to me as saying, oh, we're a not-for-profit. You ever say that, I'll slap you down? Okay, because it's so damaging. Because not-for-profit is a really powerful binary statement. You're defining yourself by what you are not.
Yes.
You are not for profit. That means you are for loss.
It's like, hi, I'm Anne, and it's like saying, oh, hi, I'm Marie, and I am not profitable.
Yeah. Please give me more money to top it up, and then I'll waste it. It's not sustainable. It's not empowering. It's not kind of encouraging or challenging or inspiring. It's just, keep putting more money in the bucket because we've got leaks in the bucket, and we know we've got leaks, and we're not going to do anything about it because we're okay with it.
Interesting here too, because not-for-profit is a very specific, at least in the US, very specific tax designation. Whereas for-profits and social enterprises, while it's possible they may have the support of government funding, or they may be recipients of a one-time grant, and those things are possible, they are typically, most of them are still taxed as a traditional business, which is a really interesting question. So I think and this is why I love having these conversations, because one of the biggest challenges around the social entrepreneurship debate, conversation, whatever you want to call it, is we need to redefine our definitions. I mean, over the next 10 years, it's my goal that we collectively can get government and large enterprises and small ones as well to start officially redefining these terms, because it's very confusing. And so some of your for-profit social entrepreneurs in UK actually still have a government designation as a nonprofit. So it's extraordinarily confusing.
Yeah. And so one of the challenges in the UK is we have about 14 or 16 different legal forms that a social entrepreneur can use to incorporate their business model within. Some of them are exempt from taxes, some of them aren't. Some of them gain special recognition, like I said, in terms of preference for contracts, that some don't. It's just really boggling. I do workshops and training courses with groups to try and help them understand what's the best structure for me to pick. I do this with startup programs. I've done it with faith-based entrepreneurs as well, as part of theological programs, in terms of if you are motivated, and this is another kind of huge branch of social entrepreneurship. If you are motivated by your faith, does that automatically make you a social entrepreneur?
Gosh, these are good questions.
And again, I think, well, my short answer would be yes, it does. The problem is the succession, because as you grow and scale your business as the faith-inspired leader of it, the entrepreneur driving it, you are making sure that purpose, those values, that change is sacrosanct. It's central in everything you do. Here in the UK, Boots the Chemist, Barclays Bank, they were set up by faith-driven entrepreneurs. But then once they retired out and other people took over who may not have shared that faith in the same way, they started to be swayed by other forces. And then we see these businesses that were once paragons of virtue because of the roots in faith, they're just the same as any other private. And actually, they're seen as being really unethical. They're really damaging now because of their employment. Where did it go wrong? At that point of succession, how do we as the social entrepreneur inspire and embed that change for the people who come after us to carry on that purpose? Like I say, Incredible Edible have taken the view of saying we'll do it as a movement change. And there have been a number of food-based and education-based social businesses that have come out of it in different places, inspired by it. Great, brilliant. But they've said in terms of keeping that vision, that impact, that change happening, we have to open source it.
Yeah.
That protects.
That makes sense. And this is, I'm so glad that you kind of helped us bookend around the conversation of succession and described it for us, because we're definitely going to have to come back and talk about this more. And my goodness, this would also make such a fantastic panel discussion, because I think there's so many things that need to be unpacked in this conversation. And, succession is just one of them. And I hope you'll come back and we can talk about that in more detail. But that's a huge and really useful question. Another one, I would like to have a conversation specifically about faith-based groups of all kinds and when they're social entrepreneurships, because sometimes I'll just play devil's advocate, but because my challenge would be, is social change adherence to a specific philosophy, right? So it kind of goes back to the old missionary principles as well. We'll give you food and we'll give you education and we'll allow you to come to the hospital as long as you're a member of our religious organization, as long as you join our religious organization. So there's a trade going on, and it might be a value, but in modern society, is that still something, does that still fall under humanitarian work? Now, I have worked with humanitarian organizations that are run by religious organizations, so I totally embrace the good that's being done, however it's being done. But these are just really fascinating questions. What is social entrepreneurship?
And the other kind of flip side to that, just to kind of take it to another side, is this sense of not just, that kind of reciprocal expectation of almost, if you want this benefit, you must do this. What about the products and services as social entrepreneurs we sell? So, for example, the fair trade movement. Everyone can pretty much agree fair trade as a business model concept, hugely empowering and inspired by faith bodies, coming out through this. And fine, no problem. But here in the UK, the two big ticket items that have underpinned the fair trade business model, generated the revenues, generated the impact, are alcohol and chocolate. Now, and we can kind of
we're going to have to wrap up, so I'll let you wrap that up, but we got about 50 seconds.
So there's that kind of sense of, it goes back to belly water. What's more important, the cause, the motivation, or the product we're selling? And we've got to, social entrepreneurs, we're constantly trying to balance off and reconcile those tensions. So we're always in a balancing act, and that's okay.
And it goes back to what you said about McDonald's, which, as in some ways is a social enterprise, perhaps. If they've rebranded, they've done some pivoting, because my mother, who's like a nutrition and I call her lovingly a health nut, and maybe you call me one too, but still, like McDonald's is pretty much the devil, right? So it's like, okay, so, but this is where, as you said, binary, or the principles of like that we're supposed to see everything in black and white, doesn't work in a real world, because it doesn't. If you can fulfill a need and do good and provide jobs and provide health insurance to single parents who would have never had it otherwise, and if you're selling a product that is in the public demand, even if it is ice cream or hamburgers, does that mean that, the essential product? So this is such good conversation, Adrian. I'm so glad you came on. And this time just flew, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface. So we hope you will come back. Thank you so much for being here. Stand by, Adrian, please, because I'm going to wrap up with you here at the end. Everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much for watching here on Global Socialpreneurs, and we stream on Wednesdays. That's at 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Check us out on USA Global TV. And we also have some big announcements coming up soon around the program and around our broadcasting, and also moving into streaming television. We're going to be, by the end of this month, we're going to be on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon TV. So please keep it in mind. And there's my dog telling me that I must end now. So thank you. Be kind to each other. Be kind to yourself. And come back next week, because we have so much more to talk about and social entrepreneurship. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye.
Peace and long life. Bye.